This kind of just says what I was just saying, but I'll expand to say even if you think that kids are in the same home environment, even if they share the same bedroom, um, within that, they're having a different experience. If you have bunk beds, for example, and you say, let's just say there's two sisters sharing a bunk bed, one's on the top, one's on the bottom, even that, they have a different view of the room. Somebody's looking at the ceiling, someone's looking at the top of another bed, or the bottom of the top bunk. Um, they have a different view on the outside wall. They have, kind of a different routine to get out of bed. Like even just something that seems really minute, and maybe one sibling picked out all the things in the room, the other sibling doesn't care for it. So they're having a different experience even within that same shared space. Family structure has certainly shifted in the last 60 years or so, 70 years. Um, it's not this kind of leave it to beaver, mother, father, a boy and a girl situation anymore. Who you live with can be your biological family, step family, friends, whomever that looks like, foster parents, adoptive parents. There's a lot of variation, and as the economy kind of ebbs and flows, that looks different also. Sometimes kids are having to move back in with their parents or choosing to live with their parents longer because housing prices are so expensive. There's just there's a lot of variation. This is also important to think about. Sometimes people get bogged down in family structure, like, oh, there has to be a mother and a father and maybe some siblings or whatever. But the reality is, how a family functions is more important than the structure. This is kind of repeated over many studies with a lot of different kids. So even if it's a single mom situation or a single dad situation, or um, some other caregiver raising the child, as long as they're functioning well, the child is much more likely to have better outcomes than if it's kind of chaos in the house. Kids do need a lot from their family. They need food, water, shelter, really basic physical necessities. They do need to learn still. They're developing this sense of self-respect. Um, they're starting to rely more on their peers and need those relationships. And then just kind of harmony and stability. I think that kind of fits into like structure. Kids during this age are still pretty keen on structure, even though they may not. They may act like they're too cool for that, but they really still rely on it in a lot of ways. As I'm recording this, there were some pretty significant tornadoes in my hometown in Tennessee just a couple of weeks ago, and I'm hearing some people talk about the way their kids are um, coping has been really um, just heartbreaking, to be honest. The Some particular friends of mine had their entire house come down. The mom and the two daughters were hiding in the linen closet. Dad was didn't fit with them in the linen closet because it was a small space, but it was the only space that they had that didn't have windows. So he rode out the storm in a different part of the house, um, and their house was the roof was off. Most of their stuff was completely ruined. Their cars were ruined. all the things. So the storm left. They left the house, and in the aftermath, in the past couple of weeks, the older daughter, I think she's 4, has really been asking some hard hitting questions about why dad wasn't in the linen closet, why when were they going back to their house, where are all their things, different things. She just was she's just trying to process it in her little innocent child way, and it's really taking a toll on not only the children but the parents, because they're struggling with how to respond, and fearful of another storm happening, and all these things. So sometimes we don't think about that, but kids are suffering by the displacement when maybe they're making a lot of moves, or they're displaced due to kind of a nature situation. There's a lot of things that go on, and it's important to think about how the kids are responding. Also think about how you're responding as the adult, and certainly reach out and get help whenever those things become real in your life. A nuclear family is just really this Leave It to Beaver family. So you have a father, you have a mother, and biological children under the age of 18. And I've already kind of mentioned this before, but that's really most. I think it's about 50-50 right now, where like maybe it's less than. I can't remember the exact numbers, but the reality is nuclear family is not in the majority anymore. So now we're much more likely to live in a step-parent family, an adoptive family, just one, a single-parent family, grandparents. You're being raised by your grandparents, maybe you're being raised by same-sex parent. There's a lot of options. Not options, that's probably the word, but there's just a lot of variation. That's the word I was looking for. There's a lot of variation in how family structures are built. A lot of single parent families, so you have one parent and his or her children, and or it could be a caregiver, just single caregiver with the kids. So grandparents, some other caregiver, depending on the situation. More than 2 adults, you have extended families, so you can live with aunts, uncles, cousins, other family. Polygamous family, this is typically a family consisting of a single father and who has more than one wife and their children. I think your book says that there's like 0% of these families in the U.S. I am here to tell you there are many more than 0%. They just tend to live in certain areas. So I lived in Utah for, like 12 years before grad school. And polygamous families were the norm rather than not. So they certainly lived in certain parts of town. You knew if you were going to certain stores or something, the polygamous families would definitely be out. So they're around. I think they have TV shows kind of depicting various polygamous family structures. And anyhow, so there's often this one dad who kind of moves between homes, and then several, like he has, several wives. The way they get around it, if you don't already know, there's like the first one he's usually legally married to, and the rest he's typically religiously married to. So not on paper necessarily, but in the eyes of their religion, they're married. So they're around. There's a lot of information, a lot of I think Utah actually just put up a bill there's somebody has introduced a bill to decriminalize polygamy because it's kind of become a newsworthy issue in the last few years there. So they're definitely around. Generally, the research says having a two-parent family is best. However, I just really feel like, again, we have to go back to family function is more important than family structure. Just because there's two parents doesn't mean they're taking care of the child better than maybe a single parent. So it's just another thing to think about with the research.